Namaste children, very warm welcome from RN NEET. This is Dr. GV here. We are going to be talking today about connective tissue, which is basically the next part of your very important chapter, structural organization in animals. These are all part of old NCRT and very many of us don't get access to these books. सिगल्ला ई तरह books so ये मिलता नहीं है और इसी के कारण ये connective tissues, this particular topic is very important for your NEET exams. Do take down notes, write down. In between, we're going to discuss a lot of important questions as well. So the connective tissue, very important, most abundant. They are the most abundant and the widely distributed. So which is the most abundant tissue, they ask? You need to remember it is connective tissue. And their special function is to link and support. That is why the word connective itself means. So you classify them into basically three types, that is proper, supportive and fluid connective tissue. You know that fluid connective tissue, blood is the only main fluid connective tissue. There is also lymph. Okay, you do get lymph, which is also associated along with it. Now you have supportive connective tissue. The body has a framework, so your bone and cartilage are your main supportive connective tissues. What is the proper connective tissue? The proper connective tissue are those which are present in between all the tissues. Now you see this bone, basically it's one framework. Okay, it is not connecting every tissue to every tissue, but the proper connective tissues are present everywhere, and so that's why called the proper connective tissue, because they are connecting the tissues all around your whole body. These proper connective tissues are either dense connective tissue or loose, so which means घट्टी इरबोदु अथवा तेलु इरबोदु. हाँ, तो वो हल्का रहता है या तो बहुत स्ट्रांग रहता है, उसी के लिए लूज और डेंस बोलते हैं. If they are loose, if they are present everywhere and they are like semi fluid, so these are called the loose connective tissue. You have in them basically the areolar connective tissue and the adipose connective tissue. What they are, we'll just discuss. The dense connective tissue, if you look at it, are mainly the tendon and the ligaments and also white fibrous tissue. So these are the main classifications as to how you basically break down the different connective tissues. Okay, perfect. We'll now go on to the next slide. Now, very important to note this, that connective tissue except blood, okay, all of them have got fibroblasts. What are they? These secrete fibers. Different types of fibers are there, and mainly two types of fibers are mainly formed, collagen and elastin. The fibers, what do? They provide strength and elasticity and flexibility. You want some amount of flexibility, some amount of elasticity. So you look at it here. There are two types of fibers which are produced by the fibroblasts. What are they? Collagen and elastin. If elastin is more, the word elastin itself, it is more elastic, it will be stretchable, so that makes it more flexible. But if collagen is more, it is more sticky, it is more rigid. So therefore, if collagen is more, it is less elastic. So which particular place you do not get. Now if the blood gets these collagen and elastin, automatically what will happen? The blood will become thicker. It won't move into the tissue, so it can get clotted also, that. So therefore, very important that fibroblasts are absent in the blood. And there is another important thing that is also there, called as polysaccharides. There are called as different types of polysaccharides, mainly mucopolysaccharides, which are present between the cells. What do? They act as a matrix or a ground substance. What is the role of polysaccharide? Acting as a matrix or ground substance. Which of this is a ground substance for connective tissues? They can give you different proteins. They can give you a question saying that there are different types of proteins, polysaccharides, minerals, and then you have to probably choose polysaccharides. So very important that you know that how these questions can be formulated. So these could be given as statements also. So very often ಈಗ statement problems last year ತುಂಬಾನೇ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. So you might get plenty of such statements. We will see some of those questions later, but important to remember the chapter. Don't read questions alone. read the chapter and then read the questions, because atra madatra you will be able to understand what is the basis behind which these questions are formed. Remember, questions can be framed, but the subject matter is the same. So therefore very important that you understand the subject matter. That's why we are going on these particular topics in an elaborate manner. Let's see the next part, the areolar connective tissue. So we're going to discuss about the different connective tissues. The proper connective tissue is the most important, that is the areolar connective tissue. The word areolar basically means air filled. Areolar. So which means air filled. So which means it is a connective tissue which is loose. There are empty pockets in between. You see here there are a lot of empty pockets in between the tissues. There are fibers, okay, collagen fibers, elastin fibers, blood vessels. There are different types of cells which are present, especially what type of cells? The fibroblasts. You know that fibroblasts will be present in all of them. There will be other cells, macrophages, just like what is present in the tissues. Around the tissues you get basically inflammatory response. Where does it come from? The inflammatory response comes from macrophages, which basically eat up, engulf particle. And where does it come from? It is not present in the blood throughout, but it is present in the areolar tissue which is surrounding these tissues. So the macrophages and the mast cell. So indirect question here which they can ask is very simple. Which of this tissue is responsible for your allergic reaction, or which of these tissues is responsible for the anaphylactic reactions in your body? They can ask you that and then give you blood as one of the choices. They can give you tissues, different tissues they can give you as choices. They can give you blood and they can give you areolar tissue. So remember, it is areolar tissue because that is the one that has the mast cells or the macrophages. So this is the way they can trick you into different kind of questions. The matter is given here, you need to understand like where these things are actually playing a role. So the macrophages and mast cells play a very important role in allergic reactions as well as immediate anaphylactic reactions and engulfing foreign body, and that comes from the areolar tissue. Okay, and there are also white and yellow elastic fibers. Remember that this is basically, so therefore where is this present? It is present typically beneath the skin, okay, and the skin basically will have different layers of epithelium and a basement membrane at the bottom. Below that will be the areolar tissue and are generally surrounded by both nerves and blood vessels. Okay, it is loosely arranged. So these are classical points. Every word of these is extremely important. Let us look at the next part. Adipose connective tissue. We'll go to the adipose connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue we have seen, the adipose connective tissue. Where are they located? They're located typically again beneath the skin. Our fat layers, especially your tummy and all, is so much laden with fat. That is basically because there is a adipose tissue under the skin. Okay, now excess of nutrients which are not used immediately are converted to fats. In our body, if glucose is excess, it gets converted to fats. Protein, if excess, gets converted to fats, and they are stored in this tissue called the adipose tissue. Adipose tissue typically consists of number of flat globules. You can see this number of flat globules, and in between them you will get these fibers. You get these fibers which are basically your fine, you get thin fibers around them. The thin fibers are white fibers and the long fibers are all elastic fibers and blood vessels. Not only you will get elastic similar to what you have in areolar, both elastic and white fibers which are present, but the white fibers are very thin and are present in between the tissues, and there are also blood vessels which run in between the fat globules. The fat globules are always such that they have a eccentric nucleus. The whole thing is laden with fat deposit, and where are the nucleus? The nucleus is present in the outermost area, very similar to the columnar where it is present at the bottom. The whole thing is laden with fat, and right there you have the nucleus which is present eccentrically, a large cytoplasm which is filled with the fat globules. So that's the classic picture of a adipose tissue. Okay, we'll go to the next important aspect, that is basically differentiating and knowing between the supportive connective tissue. The supportive connective tissue is basically divided into a tendon and ligament. You know what a tendon is. Tendon is something that basically connects your bone to the muscle. Connecting bone to the muscle is tendon. Connecting a bone to the bone is ligament. So that's the first main definition. And very good to go through this differentiation. It's very easy. Tendon is very tough, you know that, and is very rigid, whereas ligament is a little bit elastic. It is little flexible compared to that of the tendon, and you know where it connects from bone to muscle and here bone to bone. And one of the important things you need to remember between a tendon and a ligament is, you know, the content is typically more of proteoglycans. What is it that basically makes the ligament a little bit more elastic? Is basically little more amount of elastin and presence of proteoglycans. These proteoglycans make the ligament more pliable. Okay, so it makes it a little bit more flexible. Okay, and there are different ligaments. You can have as many number of ligaments basically between one bone to another bone. Within the two bones also you get as many ligaments, whereas tendon is generally only one tendon between a muscle and a bone. So if I take one bone and one muscle, you will get only one tendon. You don't get many tendons separate from one muscle to a bone, whereas from one bone to another bone, between two bones itself, like the knee joint, okay, there is a upper bone tibia and the lower bone, basically the lower bone tibia, the upper bone femur. So connecting these two, okay, you can have multiple ligaments. Okay, like if I take basically the bottom of the femur, and that is the top portion of the tibia. Okay, now between these there could be a ligament here, there is a ligament here, there is a cross ligament here, there is a front ligament and a back ligament. So between these two bones itself, if you see, there are at least 6 types of ligaments which are present. So between any two bones you can have many number of ligaments, but between a bone and a muscle you will have only one tendon. Okay, classical important point to remember that. Okay, so this is the same pictorial presentation between that of the different tissues. So you can see that between a bone to a muscle there is only one tendon, whereas there are different ligaments which are present between the different bones. Okay, now we'll go to the other important part basically, which is dense irregular connective tissue. Now you already know there is a dense tissue which are regular. Regular are your bone and tendon. But there is also some kind of tissues which are present in the skin, which is a dense irregular connective tissue. Why is it irregular? Same like your areolar tissue, but becomes more dense. So the fibroblasts are more and more number of fibers, and these fibers are typically collagen, which are oriented in a different manner. Okay, let's look at some important question. What is the matrix of the bone made of? So what is the matrix of the bone made of, and what is the matrix of the cartilage made of? Okay, very important questions. You look at it here, we talked about proteoglycans, correct? And we talked about the bone. What is the matrix of the bone made up of? Okay, the bone as such basically is made up of a kind of a matrix which contains hydroxyapatite. So the answer here is hydroxyapatite. This is not given many places, but remember this, it is hydroxyapatite. This contains high amount of calcium. Okay, whereas the cartilage, if you look at it, what is the matrix, what is the main substance which is there around which the whole amount of elastic fibers and the cartilage is made up of. So what is the main content ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಮ್ಯಾಟ್ರಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಮಧ್ಯದ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಂತ. उसके अंदर क्या है जिस पर पूरा सभी फाइब्रोब्लास्ट वगैरह उसके ऊपर रहता है. So that is called the matrix. Okay, it is a substance. Like if I basically take a porridge. Now you have a porridge, but the porridge is made up of a ground substance. Okay, it could be rava porridge, it could be a specific dal porridge. So that main substance or ingredient is called the matrix, within which you put so many other things. So the matrix of a bone is hydroxyapatite, whereas what is the matrix of the cartilage? Chondroitin sulfate. Chondroitin sulfate. So remember these two important points. Okay, good. What is the special? So these are called specialized connective tissue. Which of these are called specialized connective tissue? If they say, now here there is a slight classification. Mix blood, bones and cartilage. So your fluid connective tissue, your structural connective tissue, both together become your specialized connective tissue. So cartilage, bones and your blood, all three of them are called the specialized connective tissue. Okay, now you know this cartilage. Okay, we're going to go a little bit more into cartilage. Now cartilage is very solid and we know it is pliable. Okay, now it is pliable. Pliable means what? You can bend it, but what happens? You release it, it gets back to shape. So that is called pliability. You can little bit turn it around, you can bend it around. The tip of the nose, the ear pinna, you just bend it, you get that tuck 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 sound. So it is therefore called pliable. But what is it? Pliable means if you alter it, the shape changes, but you release it, it gets back to its shape. So therefore it is pliable but not compressible. Resists compression. Compression means if you press it, the shape changes and shape remains that way. So that is called as compressible. The cells of the cartilage are called chondrocytes. Cells of the bone are called osteocytes. Okay, within a matrix. We saw this question. Matrix, secreted cartilage. What is a matrix in a cartilage? Put it in the comment box. What is the matrix of the cartilage and what is the matrix of the bone? Right. So matrix of the cartilage, chondroitin sulfate. Most of the cartilage in vertebrates and embryos are replaced by bones in the adult. So you know this is how development takes place. In the embryo, many of it is cartilage. Gradually the cartilage becomes actually ossified, which means calcium hydroxyapatite gets deposited and they get replaced by bones. So membranous cartilage only becomes your bones, the flat bones in many of them. Cartilage is present at the tip of the nose, you know that, outer ear joints, and between the bones of the vertebral column, limbs and hands, all your limbs and hands in between your digits as well as your carpal bones. Actually, that is where you have a lot of cartilage. Okay. Now, what are the types of cartilage? Not very commonly asked, but this is a tricky question. This is one of the point booster questions, if I might say. So remember them as booster questions because these are, scoring points questions. If you know these, then you know the others also, then these becomes your scoring points. Okay, so they very commonly ask this part. Where do you get these different types of cartilage? Okay, hyaline cartilage. When you mean hyaline cartilage, it contains a large amount of a hyaline. And what is the role of these hyaline cartilage? Bone growth. Remember that. What is the role of hyaline cartilage? It helps you to elongate the bones. So therefore, it has to be present at the ends of the bones. Okay. So therefore, your long bones, end of it has to be the articular cartilages. Tips of bones of the fingers, your long bones between basically your radius ulna and that of basically your femur and tibia, all these have to be the hyaline cartilage. And also hyaline cartilage is present between your ribs, the trachea and the larynx. Trachea and the larynx also has a cartilage. Okay, and that particular cartilage is, you know that there is a cartilage called here the hyoid cartilage. correct? The hyoid bone. Look at that, the word hyoid bone. Why is it hyoid bone? Because it was a cartilage which has got more hyaline, and so therefore it is a hyoid bone. Okay, so that particular thing, cartilage, becomes a bone, and that bone is the hyoid bone because it has actually more amount of hyaline cartilage. And also the ribs have hyaline cartilage. Elastic cartilage, where do you get elastic cartilage? Now you need to be more elastic, so easily bendable, pliability is more. Very important, the external ear as well as your epiglottis, your larynx, that it needs to move fast. The moment you swallow, it needs to immediately close the larynx. The moment you breathe, it needs to open up. So it needs to be extremely elastic, because even when you are eating, you cannot stop your breath. You need to breathe in between. So therefore, the epiglottis has to keep moving very fast. Okay, so therefore that has to be extremely elastic. So that is why epiglottis and external ear are very important. Look at this, the way you can remember it. Why the epiglottis is elastic? If just somebody tells you epiglottis is elastic, you will not be able to remember it. Why it should be elastic? Try to put a reason to it. Try to put a, sometimes the reason could be logical, true. Sometimes the reason could be a little bit wavery, but it's one way of you to remember. ಅದನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಬಹಳ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ. ಸೊ ಈ ತರ you need to try to figure out how you can start remembering these things. The fibrocartilage or the white cartilage, what are they? They are the white cartilage. When you say white cartilage, they have more fiber, which means they are more dense. So what are their main function? Shock absorbers. So remember this, the white cartilage now, it is ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕು? It is a shock absorber. If ಅದು shock absorber andre, it will prevent body from taking the shock. It will be resisting the vibrations. So where do you want to prevent vibrations and basically act as a cushion? Very important. Automatically, your intervertebral disc, it has to be a shock cushion. If the cushion is not maintained, every time you jump, every time you walk, what will happen? The impact will get transmitted to all the bones, which will be problematic. So you need something to act as a cushion, like your a good amount of speed resistors they are. So you can call these as fibrocartilage or shock absorbers. So invertebral discs, your pubic symphysis, again the pubic bone. Okay, the center of the pubic bone is something like that, and you have the two parts of the pubic bone, and you have the femur attached there. So the center of this pubic bone is attached by a cartilage called the pubic symphysis. Okay, and also the menisci. What are menisci? Basically you have the knee joint, and if you have the upper portion, that is the femur, and the lower portion, the tibia, you don't want friction between these two. So therefore between this and this, there is a tissue called the menisci, again preventing friction. Shock absorbers, I wanted to tell the word shock absorbers. So this shock absorbers are very important, that it helps you to protect the body. And so therefore very simple, intervertebral disc, the menisci, as well as your pubic symphysis. These are the three parts which are your fibrocartilage, or you call them as a white cartilage. So simple to remember. Okay, so no need to mug them, no need to get perturbed. I might remember, might not remember. Put some logic to it. We are getting it there. Okay, now bones. We saw cartilage, we know bones are more hard substance. They have calcium. Okay, collagen. Not only do they have calcium, they have calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. They are storehouse of calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, which basically give it strength. Now the bones actually are made up of not just one type of cells. There are three types of cells. The main tissues which form the bones are called osteocytes. Then you have other cells which are called as osteoclast. What are osteoclast? These osteoclast actually remove the bone cells. They remove calcium. So you know that, for example, when parathormone is more, it basically increases the calcium. It makes the bones weaker because the osteoclast activity gets more. And then there are also osteoblasts. What are osteoblasts? They form the bone cells. So those that forming blast, the word blast anywhere basically means it produces more and more. So it is like growing. So therefore it is blast. Okay, it's going to create a blast where more amount is going to come out. So that's why osteoblast, which make the bone cells. Osteoclast, it is removal. Clast means it is like clasping. So it is removing. So that means clasping means like ಹಂಗೆ ಎಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರೋದು, ಅದನ್ನು ಆಚೆ ಕಡೆ ತೆಗೆಯೋದು. So that is why it is called as osteoclast. And then osteocyte. What is osteocyte? Which maintains, something that basically maintains. You know, in Hindu literature you all have heard of this: Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Okay, Brahma the creator, osteoblast. Okay, Vishnu the maintainer, osteocyte, and osteoclast the destroyer. So within our system we have Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and that's why basically we all say, you know, where does God exist? Within you. Okay, don't search for God outside. He is within you, and all of you are going to get into medicine. Your aim is to get there, basically, which is the biggest form. Patients worship you. You know, when patients come to me and they speak to me, they worship you, and that's what you need to give it back to them. You don't, sometimes we really don't feel that we need to be worshipped, but that's the amount of confidence, that's the amount of love, that's the amount of, you know, I will not say that's the amount of trust that they have on you, and you're all basically going to become that. So there is a God in each one of you. Remember that, and then put your best. I'm sure that all of you are going to be there. You're going to be there in you and meet your goals to see that the stethoscope is on you. Perfect. We'll continue there. Blood. We saw this fluid connective tissue. The fluid connective tissue is what basically it contains the whole plasma, the liquid blood with all the blood cells in it. This is a very important topic, and we're going to cover this in a much detail in the circulatory system when we come up. So I'm not going to rush into that. What is most important, another aspect of this chapter which you need to go and read little bit more elaborately and understand, is the muscular tissue. The muscular tissue basically is divided into three main types. Now you have what are called as skeletal muscles. Okay, all your triceps, biceps, the things which connect to the bone, which help you move, and it's called the skeletal muscle. Then you have in your body smooth muscles. Where are smooth muscles present? Inside your organs, like your stomach. It also is contracting, opening. The esophagus, which is allowing food to go through. Your pharynx, which is allowing the food to go through. Your tongue, which is swallowing the food. Okay, your gut, whole intestines, all the movement, the bowels, the bladder, which again is contracting. So all the tissues, if you look at it, wherever the heart has another type of tissue which is basically pumping blood, so that is also a muscle. All these are muscles, but the heart muscle is very different, and that's why that's called as a cardiac muscle. The skeletal muscle is very different, that is basically called the skeletal muscle, and the remaining visceral muscles are all basically your smooth muscle. So basically there are three main types of these tissues. Okay, we'll just zoom in here a little bit so that we will be able to see this chart and go further in each of those points in a slightly elaborate manner. Are you able to see that there? Yeah, this is much better. Perfect. So what are skeletal muscles? The skeletal muscles are basically, you know, they are voluntary in nature. You want to move it, it moves. Otherwise it doesn't basically keep acting. Whereas the smooth muscles, it should be able to act on its own. You cannot swallow food and then you cannot expect that, you know, I have to forcefully push my food down the tract. You cannot expect the bladder to distend, you know, only under voluntary control. So therefore you need the visceral muscles or the involuntary muscles, or they call the involuntary muscles, so you want them to become involuntary. Whereas the cardiac muscles again are very involuntary. You don't want the heart to pump only when you want it. It needs to pump always, isn't it? So therefore again they need to be involuntary. Okay, The skeletal muscles are mostly attached to the bones and they help in movement. You know that the smooth muscles are visceral muscles, cardiac muscles are present in the heart, and so that's why the nomenclature. They have now very important part. The skeletal muscles are typically those which have the alternate light and dark bands, and because they have alternate light and dark bands, these are actually called the you know, your A band and Z band basically, and so that is why these particular have called as striated muscles. Why are they called striated? Because they have the light band and the dark band. Okay, whereas these do not, smooth muscles do not have any light and dark bands, they are the unstriated. Now the cardiac muscle on the other hand also shows some striations. Okay, very similar, but they are not the light and dark bands, they have some striations, and these striations are, you know, also due to presence of orientation of certain fibers, and so therefore the orientation of certain fibers give this cardiac muscle some kind of striations. You can see those lines which are there in the cardiac muscles here. So those small lines which are there, these are the striations which are present, and some of them are also because of presence of intercalated discs. So which of them have got intercalated discs? That is your cardiac muscles. Okay, and the cells of these are long. In the skeletal muscles they are long and cylindrical. Okay, and these typically are, you know, unbranched and having many nuclei. There, each of those particular cells have many nuclei, and they continue to be very long, cylindrical. They are not very, if you look at the smooth muscle, you see they are basically spindle shaped. The smooth muscles tend to be more like a spindle going like that. Okay, and basically they will have a nuclei right there, whereas the striated muscles are more long, cylindrical. Okay, and they will be present in multiple packets like that, having alternate light bands, dark bands, and having basically what, multiple nuclei. Okay, whereas again the cardiac muscles are typically branched. Okay, so you want the different muscles to work together. See, in skeletal muscle you want one portion to work more, you don't want the other portion to work. So therefore the skeletal muscles typically are long, cylindrical and unbranched, whereas cardiac has to be branched. Why? Because you want the whole thing to be connected. If one part of the heart muscle is working, you want that same thing to go and, you know, cause contraction of the neighboring area. That has to go connect to another portion, so that has to connect to another portion. So that is why cardiac muscle needs to be very branched. Okay, so that everything is connected, the whole heart helps to contract as a single function, as a unison. That is why adella onthara branch irutte, so that all the branches are connected. Okay, and you know that, you know, skeletal muscles for the movement. So even the eyelid muscles, you know, are actually your skeletal muscles. You can close and open. What muscle of the eye are involuntary muscle? Mention a muscle in the eye which is involuntary. Basically your pupil muscles. Your pupil internally, it's an internal muscle. See, the moment anything is internal, it is called as a visceral or internal muscle. The pupil muscle is one which is a sphincter, which contracts, dilates to light, and so therefore, or to accommodation, and so that is why these muscles are called as smooth muscles, the iris muscles, okay, or the pupillary muscles. Whereas your eye movement muscles, okay, the movement muscles which move left, right, up, down, all these are also skeletal muscles. And cardiac muscles is present only in the heart. You don't get cardiac muscle, similar kind of cardiac muscle anywhere in the body. Okay, so very detailed description of the skeletal structure, very, very important. There is a one elaborate chart which might be also important for you people. This is slightly more detailed, which gives you, you know, the different skeletal structure, the cardiac and the smooth muscles in terms of, you know, what is their length or how it is, how the structure is. And typically if you look at the striated skeletal muscle, that is a classical muscle that has the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium, which means it has an outer layer, okay, epimysium, then it has a endomysium as well as the perimysium. So surrounding the tissue there is another layer of tissue which is covering it. So it is like a bundle, the whole thing is bundled together. Okay, so perimysium, epimysium, and endomysium, all three are present in the skeletal muscle. Okay, whereas if you look at the cardiac muscle, typically they have the endomysium. Okay, and similarly the smooth muscle typically also has only the endomysium. Okay, and they are basically present as multiple sheets. Okay, the intercalated disc, that is another important point which may be more important, and the present of T tubules. The cardiac muscle, very important that cardiac muscle works together. Now, what is the T tubules is a very important part because it's present at the end of the sarcomere. Okay, you want basically in a skeletal muscle high amount of oxygen consumption to take place. So when so much amount, the skeletal muscles demand high amount of oxygenation. So that is where the role of oxygenation, and that is where comes the role of what are called as the T tubules, which are present more in the skeletal muscles. The cardiac muscle have T tubules but much less. Okay, T tubules are absent in smooth muscles. T tubules are absent. Okay, so they are absent in smooth muscle. Sorry. So remember that these are the main characteristics, little extra features that sometimes they may want to ask you. Okay, and if you look at basically junctions, what type of junctions are present? The smooth muscle again needs to contract together, all the calcium needs to go together, and so that is why you get gap junctions in the smooth muscles. Whereas cardiac muscle also needs to contract together. Okay, so that is why they are more branched, but this particular thing has got all the junctions. You get the adherent junctions, okay, you get the desmosome junctions, which is another type of adherent junctions, as well as the gap junctions. So all these three junctions are present in the cardiac muscles, whereas skeletal muscles do not have any gap junctions. They do not have any adherent junctions. So no junctions in the skeletal muscles. Okay, so these are some extra important points. You might want to just remember them. Just keep it at the back of your mind. When you go through some questions, we will basically revise it again. Neural tissue, again this is a very important tissue. It comes under the nervous system. We'll be discussing this very detailedly, but there are a few important words that you might want to pick up here. What is a neural tissue? One that has property of excitability and conductivity. It should be able to excite and it should be able to conduct. Okay, then it is that tissue that shows greatest control over the body, okay, to changing conditions. The moment temperature changes, the nervous tissue is activated. The moment it becomes hot, the nervous tissue is activated. The moment there is some pressure on the body, the nervous tissue is activated. So anything that causes a change in condition can cause a greatest control on the body. Which tissue causes greatest control on the body? The nervous tissue. Okay, it is responsible for the control and coordination of the body. You know that neurons is the unit of the nervous system. Okay, now though neurons is the main unit of the nervous system, if I take the brain for example, 90% of the brain is not made up of neurons, but it is made up of neuroglial cells. 90% of the brain cells are formed of neuroglial cells. Important question. So which tissue makes 90% of the brain, or maximum tissue present in the brain is not the neurons but the neuroglial cells, which are supportive tissues. What are the glial tissues? They are similar like your connective tissue, your areolar tissue, like your fibrous tissue. Those that support the nerves are called the neuroglial cells. Okay, and they make up almost 1.5 times the volume of neural tissue in the body. If neural tissue is present x times, 1.5 times is actually your neuroglial cells. Okay, so the neural tissues have, what are the associated neural tissues? Nerve cell is the main function, but as I said, there are neuroglial cells, there are ependymal cells. In my shorts, you might have heard what are ependymal cells. There are specific cells called ependymal cells. What are these? These are also epithelial cells. Epithelial cells that cover the ventricles. Now, your brain basically has got, you know, particular internal portion of it. There is an internal cavity, and this particular portion of the brain has got CSF fluid. What fluid? The cerebrospinal fluid, which bathes the brain, is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid, and it also contains lot of spaces, the fourth ventricle, third ventricle, and these ventricles are actually huge. Even between basically the medulla oblongata, when it comes down, you have basically a cavity which is continuing like that, and that particular thing is yours again cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid is present within the brain tissue and around the brain tissue. This is secreted by epithelial cells lining these ventricles, and that is called the ependymal cells. So what are these tissues? They are called the ependymal cells. So this particular tissue which is lining these cells, in the inner part, is called the ependymal tissue. Okay, and also neurosecretory cells. There are other cells which basically help to secrete like a lot of hormones. Okay, and these are called the neurosecretory cells. So all these actually surround the neural connective tissue. When a neuron is stimulated, electrical disturbance is generated, and this transfers along the plasma membrane. So it creates a electrical disturbance. An arrival of the disturbance at the neuron's endings basically gives you the nerve signal or the output, and so this happens through the synapse. Okay, and this can create a stimulation or an inhibition of the adjacent neuron. So the electrical signal not only causes stimulation but can also cause stimulation or inhibition. So these are some of the important points that you want to capture in neural tissues. Remember the word excitability and conductivity. So in neural tissue ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣನೇ ನಿಮಗೆ ಎರಡು ವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಬರಬೇಕು: excitability, conductivity. The moment you remember these things in these manner, you can be sure that you're not going to miss any of those catchy words, catchy points in your questions. Okay, perfect. So with that, we come to the end of this main tissue chapter. We will quickly go on to some very interesting questions, basically DPP questions. Basically, do watch out for the next video, which is going to be on the DPP of all these important questions. We're going to be doing 15 questions on structural organization, part 1, that is the tissues. Okay, happy revision, children. Do see this whole video probably in 1.5 speed or 2 speed, depending on your grasping power, and I'm sure we will then do all the questions. Look out for the next video, which is going to be on DPP, that is daily practice problems. We're going to be doing some very interesting questions on this particular topic which we have discussed, that is the tissues. Thank you.